There's lots of other things that go on in these groups that are about accountability and encouragement at a much broader level. And if you're willing to be in a group and you're willing to take your own inventory, you're willing to look at, all of your stuff, all of your weaknesses, where you're challenged. It's not just about stopping something, as we've so often said on this show. It's usually about starting more positive behaviors, and we're going to need encouragement to do that. And that's part of what Principle 6 is about.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. I'm Randy Evert, your co-host, and we're here today to offer the sixth installment of our series on the 7 principles of recovery. Today, Dr. Laaser is going to be talking about living in fellowship. Here now is Dr. Mark Laaser and the Faithful and True podcast.
Principle number 6 states, in fellowship with others, we develop honest, intimate relationships where we celebrate our progress and continue to address our weaknesses. So, in other words, living in fellowship, I cannot succeed alone.
That's right, and it's based on not just my observation over the last 26 years, but the teaching and wisdom of many people in the recovery program that we've never really known a person who has defeated an addiction all by themselves.
And that's any form of addiction, correct?
That's any form of an addiction. Yeah, this life workbook is primarily written, toward men struggling with sexual issues, sexual purity problems, sexual addiction issues. But the principles themselves could be applied to any kind of problem in your life that you need to change. A book like this is really about changing something,
right?
Changing a destructive pattern into healthier patterns. And
well, you've been consistent in the previous shows as we've talked about these principles. There seems to be a very strong correlation to your earlier references to Alcoholics Anonymous and a lot of their standards.
That's right. In fact, as we've been honest over the last few weeks with the listeners, the astute listener, many of whom have been going to 12-step groups historically, will recognize that there's lots of elements of the 12-step program that is contained in these 7 principles. And for those that are keeping track of that, and I know there are some out there who are doing that, Principle 6 is really a combination of steps 10 and 11. And step 10 is about continuing to take personal inventory, and step 11 is about continuing to have a spiritual journey. So those are kind of things we're going to be talking about today.
Well, I think that's going to be a great subject for today's show. Is this, reminding the listeners, on a previous show, we had Dr. Greg Miller, who's our director of men's workshops on the show. And I think Greg had addressed the importance of a recovery group. And does this fall under that category today as we talk about this?
Well, Greg was talking about having a recovery team, which is, a group would be part of that.
Okay.
So we've talked in earlier shows about having a sponsor, finding a meeting, those kinds of things. It's always interesting to me that, whenever we do a show like this, there do seem to be, fairly recent examples of the points we're trying to make, the principles we're trying to teach. Just yesterday, I was meeting with a young man in my office who, over the course of his life since about age 11, had not been able to stop looking at pornography and stop masturbating. He came in to see us to, work on that issue, and one of the first things that I suggested to him was that he go to a group, one of the groups that we do here in the evenings at our counseling center. He naturally did not gravitate toward that idea because part of his story was that ever since he was a kid, he had been ostracized on the playground, teased. He had some things about him that kind of made him a little, shall we say, quirky. Mm-hmm. And obviously peer groups, particularly in grade school, pick up on that stuff and, can be merciless. He had some criticism in his family growing up. He wasn't, I guess, at some levels, the son that his father had expected him to be, so his father was critical. So suffice it to say, he didn't trust fellowship a whole lot. He didn't trust other men a whole lot. He described to me at one point that when he was in college, he would basically isolate himself even in his dorm room. He would occasionally talk to his roommate whenever he was there, but otherwise he would go to the cafeteria to eat his meals. He would go to his classes, and then the rest of the time he was holed up in his dorm room. Well, it was obviously during those days that his pornography habit on the internet escalated, and that's one of the ways that he was medicating his loneliness. So, I encouraged him to start coming to a men's group, and his first question was, is a men's group going to be safe? And I told him to take some risks, and to make a long story short, I think with some courage, he did show up. And yesterday, he told me he's been coming out to the group about a month. So, in fact, this week was his fourth group meeting. And he said, it's the weirdest thing. Since age 11, I haven't gone 1 week without looking at pornography or masturbating. And now this is the fourth week that I've been able to refrain from doing that. And I said, do you think there's any correlation between going
You are the master of the obvious. I love that.
Well, yes, I have a keen sense of the obvious. But he had kind of a sheepish grin on his face. I said, well, you were probably right. I would like to think, at some narcissistic level that, coming in to see me is what made the difference. But I know the truth, and that's not the case. I mean, what has been really helpful to this young man is that he's been in a group. Some of the guys in that group, because they know the program, they've been calling him. They've been reaching out to him. They've been texting him. They've been teaching him how to use text because he didn't know how to do that. And for the first time, I think in his life, some men have been kind to him and been able to hear and understand and encourage and include him in some of the group's activities, not only at the group meeting itself, but also outside the group. They go out for coffee, they go to movies, they play golf sometimes together. So it's really been a great thing for him. And strangely enough, he hasn't needed his oldest form of coping, which is to go on the internet and look at some crazy stuff.
You know what I love about hearing stories like that perfect example, is the fact that if our listeners out there have been paying close attention over the past several weeks, even as you have addressed the triggers of the week, and we're talking about the concept of HALT, and here this individual for his entire life has been struggling with the L. There's that loneliness, there's that insecurity because he's never been embraced by a group of his own peers, of male peers.
Right.
And so to see him now involved in a support group, it's just driving the importance of this point home.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things, I guess we could get lost just in this story, but maybe it's not a bad story to emphasize the fact that the later principles are really about continuing to work the program. It's continuing to take your own inventory. It's continuing to practice the spirituality program. Well, we'll get into that a little bit here in just a bit. But one of the aspects of this young man is that he's never had a girlfriend. And I would tell you he's about 30 years old. I say he's a young man. A lot of men are young men to me. I mean, at age 63. But, he's never had a date. He's never gone out on a date, never really had a friend who's a woman. And he is, really at some level wanting that kind of relationship or friendship in his life. And one of the neat things about the group is that it does at times provide people with coaching on how to go on a date, for example, how to ask a girl out. We could look at this with a little bit of, sarcasm, I suppose. But here's a guy in a group that he himself has never been on a date, and there are other men in the group who are trying to stop patterns of having multiple affairs.
Right.
Well, those guys know how to connect with women. You know what I'm saying, Randy? And they become excellent coaches. We've actually had a couple of weddings this summer of young men exactly like this who historically had not ever had a date. We had one guy who'd been on a lot of first dates, but never a second date. He just didn't know the socially acceptable things to do. He actually has a condition I won't go into. It's too complicated, but he did get a lot of coaching from the other men in the group. And the other guy was very similar, had never been on a date before. So the group stuff really works, Randy. I think that's part of the nature of this principle, that we continue to go to groups, we continue to have fellowship with other men, and sometimes those men are going to coach us. These two guys, and now maybe this third guy, is going to get some coaching and maybe hopefully find a healthy relationship. We've had guys that get coaching. We have high-level executives in our group, and one of the guys sponsored 2 or 3 of the other guys to go out for coffee, and he taught them how to do a resume that's going to get looked at by high-level executives.
Right.
There's lots of other things that go on in these groups that are about accountability and encouragement at a much broader level. And if you're willing to be in a group and you're willing to take your own inventory, you're willing to look at all of your stuff, all of your weaknesses, where you're challenged. It's not just about stopping something, as we've so often said on this show. It's usually about starting more positive behaviors, and we're going to need encouragement to do that. And that's part of what Principle 6 is about. In group, I think a lot of people have a conception that when we go to one of these support groups or counseling groups for a particular problem like sexual addiction or alcoholism or whatever else it would be, that's all we talk about. We just talk about problems with sex or the problems with drinking. And that's not at all the case. Accountability is going to talk in an ongoing way about what are some of your struggles in life, what are some of your issues in life. One of the things that I learned when I was in treatment, and I was in treatment at a program that was created and developed and led by Dr. Patrick Carnes. And in treatment, before we graduated, we had to fill out something that Pat called the Personal Craziness Index, the PCI, and we just shortened it up to PICI. And in the workbook that we're talking about here, like some other things I've done, I've taken some of Pat's concept of things and translated it into other language or translated it into Christian language. And in the workbook, the people who want to get one and look at it will notice that I've got a form there called the Daily Moral Inventory, because I think it's not just a matter of taking our personal inventory, it's also a matter of taking our moral inventory, our spiritual inventory. But basically, you'll see there's a list of categories to kind of discern on a given daily basis how you're doing in terms of your vulnerability to the behaviors that we're trying to change. So I figured out early on that there's certain things that if I allow myself to get into it, it means I'm more vulnerable to wanting to cope. One of the ones may sound crazy, but it's actually not an uncommon one for people listening, and that is, when I get in my car on a daily basis, I notice, is it a rolling trash can or is it a well-picked up, vacuumed, car? And I notice that if my personal space, whether it's my office or whether it's my car, whether it's my side of the bed in the bedroom, if it's out of control, if I've got stuff laying all over the place, if I haven't picked up things, put stuff in the dishwasher, whatever else it happens to be, I just notice my life feels a little bit more chaotic, out of control. Now, that's just one of mine. It doesn't have to be one of yours. I notice, of course, that if I haven't made some regular contact with other men, if I'm feeling a certain level of loneliness, the emotions that we've been talking about on earlier shows, the hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, those are all parts of my moral inventory or my daily moral inventory. Cards encourage that, if you have certain categories, like have you connected, have you found meaningful activities to be involved with, have you picked up your room, have you gone to a meeting, all of these kind of things, he would give it a score. And if you hadn't done some of these things, you'd get a 5. And he always used to claim that if your score was over like 20, 25, 30, in other words, there are certain things that you're not doing that are matters of self-care, really, you're more likely to act out. So I would just encourage the listeners, even, stop the show for a minute and start even thinking in your head about a list of what are the things in your life that you would notice when they're kind of out of control, you're not doing them, you're not participating in positive self-care. You would notice that you're a lot more vulnerable. Part of the program is not just stopping something, it's also noticing when we're more vulnerable and when we're not doing self-care. That's part of the ongoing inventory. Are you taking good care of yourself? So think of some lists of some things that are actual specific daily activities or criteria. And now the important point is if you notice that your score or some of those things are increasing and life is getting more vulnerable, then you should probably reach out to your community for some encouragement and help to get going on some of that stuff.
Well, it sounds like that's the kind of subject matter that by participating in a group, you're going to have those other group members that are pretty well versed in that self-care. They've experienced that when things are disheveled and it's almost an image that emulates what's going on in your life. You don't have your act together at the moment.
Right.
And the more that you seem to get things in order and clean up that car, I myself don't like a messy car.
Yeah.
It kind of drives me crazy. Mm-hmm. You just seem to be more focused and on track. I wanted to ask you a question. You made reference to the Life Guide for Men, which is a powerful resource for the men out there. And on Principle 6 is the statement, fellowship is equal to freedom from lust. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, I think we were talking about that in the early part of the show, but you're mentioning that recovery people like formulas. They like simple, pithy kind of statements or slogans or things like that to kind of memorize. I kid with the men sometimes about tattooing things. I'm not a believer in tattoos, but I don't need to get into that. But I do think, reminders that are pithy, that are short, and that is, in fact, one of my formulas, that when you think about the lust that you're trying to stop, freedom from lust is equal to fellowship. If you're a man with other men, if you're a woman with other women.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay, all right.
Now, one last thing I think, Randy, to talk about on this show before we completely run out of time today, and this is really kind of central and actually one of the deeper parts of the program, and that is the fact that we need to have a daily spiritual journey. And it's true that the average man who walks into our offices here or comes to our workshops or comes to whatever events we're doing around the country or around the world, they're already Christians. We don't have a lot of work here in terms of what might normally be called evangelization or getting people to commit to our relationship with Christ. I've been blessed with the fact that I think 99% of the guys that walk through our door already have a committed relationship. What they don't have a daily kind of spiritual discipline. Over the years, I've been blessed by getting to know, being called into some consultation with Catholics around the country. I'm currently working with one of the local seminaries. I have spoken to any number of diocese priest groups. I've had one nun client along the way, which has been very fascinating. The reason I'm bringing that up is that Catholics tend to historically be much better at encouraging their members to do a daily spiritual discipline. Now, I would say the average Catholic, growing up in this may not have necessarily completely understood it, like saying the rosary or going to daily mass or whatever it is. I'm not here to get into any of this theologically, simply to say that I do know that the people who spiritually grow are the people who have some kind of daily spiritual discipline.
A routine.
Yeah, and this is basically just step 11, continue to have, a spiritual journey. And one of the things that I found fascinating early on is that when we talk about in the program sponsors and guys that are calling us and guys that are encouraging us and all this kind of thing, do we have spiritual encouragers in our life? It's important for a variety of reasons. So many of the false core beliefs that we have in our heads, so many of the lies that we tell ourselves, are just not consistent with the truth of who we really are in the sight of God. They're not consistent with scriptures about the fact that we're fearfully and wonderfully made. God has loved us since the moment of our conception. God sent his only son to die for us. So, we have a lot of truth, and given our situations in life, we don't always believe it. We're going to need encouragers to remind us of truth. And if we have sponsors in the program, the guys that are directing us about going to counseling, going to groups, I think we also need our sponsors or a sponsor to be encouraging us in our daily spiritual journey. And there again, more so I think than the evangelical Protestants, the Catholics have actually a designation for this, spiritual director. It's a common term, and I know I can hear all my Protestant. We have that too. We have mentorship, we have guidance, we have Bible studies, we have all this. That is in fact the case. But what we're talking about in our program is that this should be kind of daily reminders, not just you show up once a week at your Bible study, but that you're encouraged to get into the Word on a daily basis. You're encouraged to get into prayer on a daily basis. You're encouraged to read great spiritual writers along the way. Some of our research has shown that guys that are able to do 15 minutes a day of some kind of concentrated study of God's Word in prayer and meditation, those guys have much better thought life, strangely enough. If we direct our thoughts in certain ways, in this case toward God, it will turn our thought life away from, the evil thoughts that we can otherwise have. So my parting question, I think, for today's show anyway, is, who are the spiritual guides in your life? Who are the mentors? Who do you look up to? So many of the guys, they come in a group and they say, I just listened to this great, sermon online from this and such a guy out in Seattle or wherever else these people happen to be. And I think that's great. Download sermons. That's another thing we can do these days. Most of the great churches, most of the great preachers out there, just like we do, they have a podcast and they'll send it to you on a weekly basis. It's never a bad thing to get more than one message in a given week. While you're working out, while you're driving, instead of the trigger of the week, we talked about morning radio. Listen to something in the nature of a teaching. There's all kind of practical ways to do this. One of the points of this entire show is that we're going to need other men in our life encouraging us to do these positive things.
Thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. We hope that this episode has been meaningful and beneficial to you. Anytime that I get the chance to revisit the conversations with Dr. Laaser, it always leaves a very strong and meaningful impression. So we hope that this episode was the same for you. And we invite you to join us again next week where we will address the seventh of these 7 principles. In the meantime, please visit us at faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources available to you, over 600 podcasts such as this one, and resources that will lead you to our information and online registration for our 3-day intensive workshops. In the meantime, we hope this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.